Oh, good to go? Check, check, check. Oh, here? Okay. Hey, everybody, we're going to get started in a second. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming back out after lunch. I know must be kind of tired after lunch and a long conference. Thank you all for being here and for attending this, amazing conference. My name is Vincent Brown, and I'm an associate over at Arnold & Porter, which is a law firm in Washington, D.C. We help Complete College America out on their federal policy-related issues. Prior to working at Arnold & Porter, I worked in the United States Senate for several years for Senator Amy Klobuchar, doing a whole bunch of different things. So I think this is relevant to the general theme of the conference, but I recently finished reading the John Adams biography by David McCullough. So John Adams has to be one of our most interesting and fascinating founding fathers, but what I found even more interesting about the book was learning about his wife, Abigail Adams. There was a very interesting story in the book talking about their son, John Quincy Adams, who eventually became the 6th president of the United States. During his time, John Quincy was one of the most well-traveled Americans of his age. He had traveled with his dad to London and Paris, and without his dad to St. Petersburg in the Netherlands. So after all these travels, he came back to America in 1785 to enroll in college, right? Like, he is around 17 years old. But when he enrolled, he started acting out. He started being disruptive, talking about how he knew more than his peers and the teachers due to his travels. But I mean, who wouldn't, right? Like, if you had traveled all over the world, you would think you're better than some of these people too. And I was trying to think of an analog to what that would be like today, and I feel like it would almost be analogous to if your child had traveled to the moon and Mars, and then they had to go start freshman year Astronomy 101 the next year, right? So his mom, hearing about this, wrote him a letter. And Adams, both John and Abigail, are really well known for their letter writing. There's a huge repository of them back up where John Adams is from in Quincy, Massachusetts. But I'll read part of that letter and I'll slightly paraphrase it. So she said to John Quincy, "If you're conscious to yourself that you possess more knowledge upon some subjects than others of your standing, reflect that you have had greater opportunities of seeing the world and obtaining a knowledge of mankind more than any of your contemporaries, that you have never wanted for a book that has been supplied to you, and that your whole time has been spent in the company of men of literature and science. How unpardonable would it have been for you to have been a blockhead?" So what Abigail Adams is telling her son here is to understand the privileges that have been granted to him and to acknowledge the head start that he's had in life compared to others. So when America, I think of this story, I think of CCA's mission that they believe higher education has a choice to continue to reflect the racial, social, and economic injustice in society, or to reimagine our systems to be engines of equity, prosperity, and hope. So echoing that, I think we need to think about how we reimagine our systems to ensure that students today have the same opportunities that John Quincy had in the past. And I think a lot of that comes down to advocating for changes in federal policy. So I have my first slide here, and it shows a guy returning the U.S. capital to a person, and then the person says, "No need to explain," right? And I actually think this slide, I can't really see, I think it says 2011 is when the political cartoonist drew this, and it shows how much more dysfunctional Congress has been since then, given that I think many people in the political process would love to have a Congress that acted as the 2011 Congress did. This particular Congress has been exceptionally dysfunctional, And it's easy to forget all that's happened. I do, and I work in politics. So it started off in January with 15 ballots to elect the Speaker of the House, threats of defaulting on the national debt, a lack of an appropriations process that has flirted with the government shutdown, censor resolutions for at least 3 members of Congress, 1 member of Congress being expelled, a senator indicted on bribery charges, an upcoming impeachment inquiry, and next year being a presidential election year, which brings its own surprises. I was listening to Susan from Bennett College yesterday, and she speculated about teacher protests related to AI, which is something that I hadn't really thought about, but you never know what kind of surprise things may happen, especially during a presidential year. So these are dysfunctional times, and it shows in the lack of progress on substantive education legislation in Congress. Things are not likely to change in the short term, especially with an upcoming presidential election. So here are some of the education leaders in the 118th Congress, which is the Congress that we're currently in. And as we all know, there's tons of leaders in the education space in Congress. You know, we've been watching videos from them the last 2 days. But I wanted to highlight these 4 individuals because they're the chair and the ranking members of the relevant education committees in both the House and the Senate. So Chair Virginia Foxx from North Carolina, she is a Republican. Ranking member Bobby Scott is from Virginia, and he's a Democrat. In the Senate, we have Senator Bernie Sanders, who's an independent that caucuses with Democrats. Basically, he associates himself with Democrats. And then we have the ranking member, Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, and he's the one that sent a video out yesterday. So what does it mean to be like chair and ranking member? Chair is just whoever the party's in charge decides, okay, this person's going to be leading the committee. The ranking member is the minority party, the party that's not in charge. They're representative of the committee. So, outstanding education reauthorizations. As mentioned, there's been little bipartisan movement on education priorities in this Congress. As seen from the chart, there are several programs in this Congress in the education space that have not seen a reauthorization recently. So a reauthorization is basically when Congress has the opportunity to take a look at revising or revisiting an existing program. So given the dysfunctional nature of this Congress, we're unlikely to see movement on many of these in the next year or so. But 2 places that we are seeing some movement on is reauthorizing the Education Sciences Reform Act, also called ESRA. You can see that at the top of the slide. So the Senate Help Committee, which is the Senate committee I just showed you that has Chair Bernie Sanders and Ranking Member Bill Cassidy, they released a bipartisan bill to reauthorize ESRA, which they've been working on for months. So commenting on that legislation, Senator Cassidy said, ESRA provides research and data to inform our nation's education system. Reauthorizing and improving this legislation helps ensure our students receive evidence-based instruction to meet their unique educational needs. Congress has also been considering workforce or short-term Pell. So after several months of negotiation, House education leaders recently introduced a bipartisan bill, the Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act. Commenting on this, the House Education Workforce Committee described the legislation as providing opportunities for students and workers looking to gain skills in high-demand fields by allowing Pell Grants to support students enrolled in high-quality short-term workforce programs that will lead to career advancement. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but we're going to talk about the Higher Education Act reauthorization. So Chair Virginia Foxx has been taking a piecemeal approach to Higher Education Act reauthorization. She wants to focus on 6 main policy topics. So that includes foreign influence. You can see some of these at the bottom too. Foreign influence, freedom of speech, association, religion, cost of college and accountability, accreditation reform, workforce innovation, and campus safety. So the hope here is to put these pieces of legislation into a broader comprehensive package after they get consideration and buy-in from some of her Republican colleagues. So the accountability piece is a big concern for the chair and Republicans generally. They want to ensure that students are receiving an adequate return on investment. So this could mean that would put universities on the hook for students who do not repay their loans, which is a major concern for institutions, particularly since this type of proposal could disincentivize universities from recruiting higher risk students. So CCA has engaged with the House Education and Workforce Committee staff on Higher Education Act authorization, reauthorization, and staff has been very interested in CCA's take on these issues. We'll continue to engage on these topics as this piecemeal effort moves forward. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Capitol, the Senate is not expected to take a look at reauthorizing the Higher Education Act this Congress. And as a reminder, I alluded to this in the beginning, but most significant legislative activity will stop pretty early this year due to the presidential election. So don't really expect to see much occur after April or so. So CCA priorities for the Higher Education Act. Here you can see purpose, structure, momentum, and support. So if a future Higher Education Act of the HEA does happen, CCA has a detailed list of priorities that aligns with the 4 pillars of college completion. So purpose, the idea is to empower students to pursue purpose-driven education by establishing their goals for higher education at the start of their college journey. Structure, we're looking to change federal policy to make it easier for students to navigate higher education structures. Momentum, as you all have seen in your states, there are also a lot of policy changes that are important for helping students build on their academic momentum from previous courses. And support, we're also exploring what it looks to increase basic needs funding and increase the support available to students. So another thing I wanted to highlight is the CCA Alliance Day on the Hill. So this was actually one of my first events that I did with CCA, and it was a really incredible opportunity to get CCA and CCA-affiliated institutions out to actually lobby and interact with members of Congress and their staff. I wish I had some pictures now that I think about it. I probably should have included some pictures there. But it was such a fun and exciting day, and attendees lobbied on 2 main pieces of legislation. You can see those here, the College Transparency Act and the Funding for College Completion Initiatives. So Senator Cassidy referenced the College Transparency Act in his remarks yesterday to everyone, but he has really been a leader on this topic, and it has pretty broad bipartisan support. As you can see from this slide, this legislation would create a student unit record system to provide more accurate and timely data on student access and success. The major roadblock to this bill becoming actual law is Chair Fox from the House of Representatives. She is the one in this slide right here. She has concerns about privacy of data if the federal government is in charge of collecting that data. So her staff has shown an openness to negotiations on the legislation, particularly if it were only to apply to students who receive Pell Grant funding and if accountability measures are included in the HEA. But it remains to be seen how to overcome this roadblock. Attendees of the Alliance Day on the Hill also lobbied on the College Completion Fund Act. That's the one on I guess, on your right side. This is legislation that Senator Heinrich has been leading, whose video you saw yesterday. We've been working really closely with his staff on this, and CCA has been working with like-minded advocacy organizations like Third Way to negotiate language on the updated bill. We're expecting this bill to be introduced sometime this month or at the latest early next year. So how else is CCA engaging at the federal level? CCA was one of the few advocacy organizations involved in the creation of the Congressional Predominantly Black Institutions, PBI caucus. So in Congress, the caucus is basically where a group of members of the House or Senate, and sometimes both of them, associate with each other to advance an issue or a cause. CCA has worked with Rep. Robin Kelly's office, which she's from Illinois, suburbs of Chicago, in the creation of this caucus. Now that this caucus is established, we're working towards future ways of engaging this new caucus. So if you have any ideas, feel free to reach out to me. But we're really happy about this. This is something CCA has been working on for a while, and really glad it came to fruition. This has been mentioned throughout the conference, so I won't go too deep into it, but CCA has been actively engaged on artificial intelligence issues as well. They recently sent comments to Senator Bill Cassidy on a white paper on AI that he released, and CCA has released their own publications on AI, and you've seen these pop up throughout the day. So to close, ways to engage with CCA at the federal level. So we want you to engage with CCA at the federal level. Tell your stories at your institutions and within your state. Invite your members of Congress to see firsthand what you're doing, and participate in the CCA Alliance Day on the Hill. It really is a great opportunity, and you get to come out to DC and see what lobbying actually looks like. It actually is effective when you go and talk to your members of Congress or the staff. The staff are the ones that run basically the country. So talking to them is just as equally, if not more important than talking to the member of Congress. That concludes my remarks on the federal update. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Grace Makupa, who's CCA's policy director, to introduce the panelists for this session.
Vincent, we enjoy working with Arnold and Porter, and thank you for those updates. We know there's chaos on the Capitol Hill, but it's good that you brought it us to a level with education, what's going on. And I'll introduce your panelists. I'm so excited. Thank you for being here. I know a lot of people are traveling, but this is streamed live, so a lot of people are receiving this message. So I'll introduce my first panelist. I know you have their bios. Feel free to read them later on. I won't read their bios. I'll just read their titles and what they're doing. My first one is Dr. Will DePilla. Yes. Dr. Will is a senior VP, the Education Trust. So welcome. And wonderful. Our second one will be Dr. Janae Chandler, who is, let me see it. There you go, Dr. Janae. And she got the memo. I know you're wearing red like me. Dr. Janae is a director, college completion, she's a policy director for TCAS, which is the Institution for College Access and Success. And my third one, not least, we have Ms. Ryan, Jessie Ryan from California. They don't know I have questions for them. Ms. Jessie is Executive VP, the campaign for college. Thank you for joining us. I think you forgot red for green. And my fourth one is Dr. Lee Nimax, who is a Senior VP and Chief of Staff for Kentucky Council for Post-Secondary Education. We saved the best for last. No, I didn't, just because I went to SUNY. So we have my last panelist today is from SUNY. We have Dr. Colin CUNY, sorry, I said SUNY. CUNY, which is University of New York, City University of New York. Not SUNY, but CUNY. Dr. Colin Chapman. So thank you very much. I do have questions. I'll sit with you. You all have your mics with you, and I'll sit down just so we can make this friendly. And my first question, these are questions that were submitted to us. It will be Dr. Will, and we'll go as you came to sit. The Supreme Court has significantly shaped equity-related higher education policies, such as affirmative action in admission. What steps can be taken on a state level to help promote diversity and inclusion in college completion?
I talked a little bit about this earlier if you were in one of our, the session on affirmative action specifically, but I do think there are state level frameworks that we need to be thinking about to create opportunities for universal access. A lot of folks, we shifted the conversation from an access to a completion conversation several years ago, but I would argue that we haven't really figured out access. In fact, in states where we saw bans on affirmative action, enrollment of black students never recovered. I looked at some data recently from California. the CSUs and the UC schools are all less, they have fewer black students today than they did 20 years ago. So we haven't figured out access, and so we do need to be thinking about state-level frameworks in the absence of broader federal level. We just got the update. We're not going to see much moving. The last time we had a reauthorization of HEA, I was actually a graduate student intern. And so it's been a while. So I do think that at a statewide perspective, we need to be thinking about, one, pathways. What design pathways do we actually have going into post-secondary education? When we think about the K-12 perspective, I know lots of folks said, we're focusing on college, everyone's going to college. When we look at the national data, only 52% of students who graduated high school last year went on a post-secondary. That means 48% didn't. When 70% of the jobs that are being created are going to require some level of post-secondary education, we need to be designing better pathways into post-secondary education. And that doesn't necessarily mean bachelor's degree. I mean, we see a huge rise in short-term certificates. With the update on Pell for workforce, maybe that's an opportunity for us to rethink what we're doing in terms of pathways into post-secondary. Second, I think that, for me, direct admissions is a very promising way of creating that universal framework into post-secondary education. States like Idaho, the Dakotas, SUNY actually just are creating a direct admission program. And what direct admission effectively is it's admissions directly to the institutions, so students opt out. And I like the way Idaho does it. There's no application. There's no fee associated with it. They leverage a statewide longitudinal data system to automatically admit students into at least 6 colleges, right? And so students find out early on that they're admitted to 6 colleges, 2- and 4-year institutions, and then students can opt out. I think it's easier to have an opt-out than to have an opt-in system. And when we think about, for example, retirement programs for employers, there is actually some evidence to show that that's more equity-focused to have an opt-out instead of an opt-in program. FAFSA as a high school, if you're going to do that, though, you probably should have FAFSA as a high school graduation requirement. We know lots of dollars, Pell dollars, get left on the table. I do think that you have to design that with supports. We should not create a mandate for there to be a FAFSA for all high school graduates to complete FAFSA, and then say, okay, your high school counselors who are already overworked, go get it done. Louisiana, in my opinion, has done it very effectively, leveraging intermediaries to provide additional supports to states around FAFSA completion. And then, I would say the biggest barrier that students face is affordability. And so we need to be thinking about statewide frameworks to make college tuition free. I would love to see a federal-state partnership, and we were really close during the pandemic to getting a federal-state partnership that would make 2-year colleges tuition free. We didn't get there because of one Senator Manchin from West Virginia. But states are doing this. We see states tackling last dollar programs, and while they're not my favorite, I don't think that they address affordability for the neediest students. I think that the messaging is good, and I do think that if you create a framework where you have tuition-free college, where you have all students completing FAFSA, where you have students being directly admitted, I do think we can address some of the declines in enrollment we've seen and some of the gaps in equity in terms of college access that we're seeing nationally. That's all you have to do. Yeah, that's all you have to do.
We're done.
Thank you so much. So we will have follow-up questions, especially you talked about affordability, you talked about access, you talked about better pathways, you mentioned Idaho, so we'll follow up later on. Dr. Janae, are you ready? Fabulous. I have a question,
Yes.
a special one for you. There has been a growing focus on economic disparities in higher education with concerns about access, affordability. So that follows up in his question. What policy recommendation do you have for improving access to higher education for low-income students?
Yeah, so at TICAS, we work in federal advocacy as it relates to affordability as well as accountability. We are now building out our college completion portfolio, which really is focused on the holistic or comprehensive needs of students. And so as we're mapping out our policy agenda, I'm being very intentional on looking at what the historic data tells us, right? So I don't know about y'all, but my grandmother and our elders used to say you have to know where you come from to know where you're going. And I think before we can become really future ready or really address barriers related to access and affordability and completion and all the things, we really need to take some intentional time to look at data. So nationally right now, we have touted the 62% completion rate for the 6-year cohort rate, right? But in reality, when you disaggregate that data and you look at it from a racial equity lens, that figure is not true for Black students. We are still missing the mark on our Black student access, but also the completion. So for Black students amongst that cohort, that data set, I wrote it down because I don't want to mess it up, right? 31% complete who started at community colleges. 50% completed who started at 4-year institutions. And then also, we can't forget about the 40 million people with some college, no degree. And when you break that down, Black students, we've made really good progress, but our gains are still not on par with our white, Asian, and even Latino counterparts. So one of the things that we are heavily advocating for in our work is the Post-Secondary Student Success Grant Program, which you heard mentioned in the opening presentation. We are starting to see strong support for that grant program, which is really sort of designed and modeled based on evidence-based programs such as Inside Track, CUNY ASAP, 1 Million Degrees, and what the federal government is essentially positioning us to do is to be able to provide funding to meet students' needs from a holistic perspective. So these programs include advising, coaching support, financial incentives and supports like scholarships, as well as support around childcare, transportation. And what's also unique about these programs are they're not tacked on to someone's job. They have designated staff who are responsible advisors and case managers for those students that are in those programs. However, as I mentioned, we're missing the mark with Black students. We're missing the mark when we tie in additional margins and intersections of income, rurality. And so what we're prioritizing to kind of close us off on this is what are the policy and funding conditions necessary to implement these types of evidence-based programs in the communities and the institutions in which these students attend. So these students you'll find them at regional comprehensives, you'll see them at community colleges, and our minority serving institutions. Actually, this group of institutions actually serve 86% of undergraduate students. However, they remain underfunded and under-resourced. So our policy focus is making sure that these institutions are well-equipped to be able to meet the needs of the students that they serve.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. We appreciate that you mentioned affordability and we're missing the mark. And I just want to let the audience know that you are a recipient growing up of a Pell Grant. So you have walked into those shoes. So thank you for your experiences. Jesse, I'm coming to you. I know you did mention, you're from California, you did mention, I asked, I was interviewing these people earlier, you are proud to be raised by a single mom who was struggling and you made it to this point. So I have a quick question since you're from California. Yeah, California has been tackling an ambitious set of higher education reforms. Can you share a few key policies and initiatives that your organization, specifically your organization, that you have been implementing?
Yes, thank you, Grace. So, the Campaign for College Opportunity has been at the forefront of dismantling inequitable systems in California for nearly 2 decades, with a laser focus on improving outcomes for students of color and low-income first-generation students. We've focused almost entirely on our public colleges and universities with a huge intentionality around community college reform because because if you care about racial equity and you care about student success, you have to invest your time and energy in systems change at community colleges, which are the gateway to opportunity for the majority of students across the country. We have, over nearly 2 decades, done a great deal of work on both transfer reform and developmental education reform, and I'm going to come back to that. But at this current moment in time, I would say we are meeting a racial equity imperative as a result of the egregious decision by SCOTUS to ban race-conscious admissions. And because we know that that will have a ripple effect that will continue to be felt for generations to come. The Campaign for College Opportunity decided that it was critical that we not just tackle the state policy reforms that have been the bread and butter of our work, but we came forward and we said we're going to be part of coordinating a national strategic response to the SCOTUS decision, and that is going to come with research that is the best in the field based on what we know are evidence-based practices that actually lead to more racially just outcomes, and tools for our ed equity allies, for our presidential leaders, for our staff at the community college level, so that they have a response that we feel is meeting the moment and addressing the needs of students and families across the country. Just today, we released an inclusive hiring brief with 2 incredible authors. You might know Dr. Frank Harris and Dr. Luke Wood, so please go to our website and download that brief. We've also recently done 2 papers on what I believe are the most important reforms we can be tackling, both at a state and a national level in response to the SCOTUS decision, and that is really looking at transfer and looking at ensuring that students have access to college-level math and English through the gates of community colleges. In California, we saw years ago, with fewer than 3% of community college students reaching their transfer dreams within 2 years of entering a community college, that there was a need for radical change. I often say I would be a statistic having attended 3 community colleges simultaneously to get the classes I needed to transfer, were it not for one person that helped me find my path. Well, we shouldn't rely upon luck or the goodness of one person. We should have systems that work for students. And so we have put in place an associate degree for transfer, a common lower division general education pathway. We are in the process of implementing common course numbering across the state of California, and default placement for community college students on the associate degree for transfer pathway, of which we are nearing 500,000 students who have earned that degree, the majority of whom are Latinx. And then I'll just say, in wrapping this up, probably our most transformational policy, and the policy that I cannot evangelize enough, is this idea of reimagining remediation so that we are not putting students into remedial ed sequences that kill college dreams, but we are swinging the doors of opportunity open by ensuring that students through the gates of community college go into a transfer level math or English class with the appropriate supports. And I am very proud to say that all 116 California community colleges are implementing this, and it has been the most significant civil rights reform with huge gains for our Black and Latinx students across the state.
Thanks, Ms. Ryan. Very radical transformation. I'll move into a different segue. Our globe, we have been facing a lot of things in the Middle East, a lot of displacement in the past few years. We have Sudan, we have Congo, Afghanistan. I know that Kentucky has a pilot program that started in 2022, which has it has the ability to assist displaced people, whether it's natural disasters, war, or anything from other countries. These are people coming to our country. So I would like for you to share with the audience how that program is going. What are the successes, the challenges that Kentucky is facing? So I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Grace. And I'll take a little commercial break to thank CCA for the work that they're doing. They have really been a terrific partner with Kentucky and have supported us in a number of ways. I have been really blessed to be part of this organization over the past decade and have seen it evolve. And so I just wanted to sort of take a minute to talk about how much you mean to the states, and certainly states like Kentucky. So back to the question, thanks for the platform to talk about this program because it's exciting. We were appropriated $10 million in Kentucky about 18 months ago. And $10 million in states like California doesn't seem like very much, but in a state like Kentucky, it is a great deal of money to start a brand new scholarship program for a population of students that we have never really supported directly at the state level before. And quite honestly, I don't know how much was going on at the individual campuses to support displaced or refugee populations. But, you know, I think that our legislators were seeing all of the destruction and the war in Ukraine and Afghanistan and Sudan and Congo, and I think that they wanted to make a very a strong statement about Kentucky being not only a welcoming place for refugees and displaced people, but also that we were going to help give them a step up. So not just to resettle displaced people, but provide them with a pathway towards a job, a career, and a family-sustaining wage. So hopefully they can stay in Kentucky and contribute to our workforce and our economy. So I think that, you know, in looking at this program, a lot of people are looking at it as a workforce development program. So very quickly, a little bit about the program. We decided pretty early on that we needed help. You know, I don't know if any of you guys have worked with immigration issues and definitions, but it's very complicated. We started working with a couple of national organizations, including the National Association of System Heads, and they helped us really stand up this program very quickly. So we got the money in March. We actually started implementing it in July. So we decided early on that it was going to be for undergraduates only. And we also felt like it needed to be, it should cover the total cost of attendance. And that's pretty rare in our student aid programs in the state. But we know how many folks who are displaced came to the country or came to our state without anything, the clothes on their back. You know, for them to be asked to pay, you know, anything above tuition, I think would have been very difficult. So we made that decision early on, and I think that was a great help. The other thing we realized, though, is that, and I referenced this before, the campuses and, you know, organizations like CPE were not well versed in how to really provide supportive services. You know, money is helpful, but it's not everything. So we were able to work with NASH and our other national partners to create a statewide community of practice. That group met monthly and began to help folks like student aid directors and student affairs people and folks in our international studies departments understand kind of the needs that these students would have coming in, how to create wraparound services that would be specific to these populations. And so I will tell you, you know, the jury is in to a certain extent, although we are still in the middle of this pilot. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to this group is because we're obviously going to be advocating for continuation of it. And we hope that other states pick up the mantle because we think that, you know, this issue of displaced populations is not going to go away. It is going to continue to grow, and I think that the U.S. is going to need to be seen as a place of refuge for these students. We served students from 23 countries. We served about 400 students this past year, and I'm sure that number will increase next year. And so thus far, in our conversations and the evaluation that we've done for the first year, it's simply been life-changing. I mean, there's no other way to put it. You know, it's not only folks coming in without any education, but it's folks coming out, perhaps they were a social worker in the Sudan, but they don't have that same certification here. So they needed to skill back up, and so this provides them a pathway. So I could go on, and I'm happy to talk to anybody more about it later, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. I guess they don't want me to talk. Thank you for sharing that. It is good for America to be an example and a place for that. So we'll talk.
Can I say something? Because
Yes.
I think we should support all immigrant students, including undocumented. And I'd like to see states provide the same type of supports to undocumented students who don't get access to any federal resources, and in certain states don't even get access to state resources. So I would love to see us support all immigrant students, including those that are undocumented, at the state level.
Fabulous, including the national students who are documented. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll move to Dr. Collin, because we have been talking about AI throughout different sessions. For CUNY, as a lead person, we have these pedagogies that you're using to assess students, maybe registration and student support services. How is the City University of New York utilizing these pedagogies or any resources with AI? And what's the future?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Grace. So it wouldn't be a panel at a conference these days without talking about AI. And I imagine the audience falls into two groups broadly. There's one group that was excited about it, and now you're less excited about the promise of AI until AI fulfills that promise. Or you're in the group that is still excited about it. So I am here to bring you all together under the banner of boredom. I want to talk about the foundational work we need to do in data collection. Yes, I know a lot of you are interested in data analysis, data reporting, metrics, but this is data collection, the most boring thing of all. But this is where we're focusing at CUNY. 2 weeks ago, CUNY held its annual IT conference, and the theme this year was AI. Surprise. Faculty and staff submitted 100 proposals showing the vast array of uses of AI. AI tools and algorithms for administrative productivity, for student support services, for advising. It ran the gamut. The one common thread is its reliance on data. So AI algorithms, AI tools are trained on enormous data sets. And to the extent that those data sets aren't representative, AI is going to reproduce those biases. And so we've seen this for years in biomedical research, just as an aside. There is a long history of biomedical research leaving out large portions of the population. So let's learn those lessons of history and get it right with the AI revolution from the beginning. So CUNY, like a lot of institutions, uses PeopleSoft as its student information system, and we have a record for every student who was enrolled and is currently enrolled. CUNY, like a lot of other institutions, has dozens and dozens of special programs, like mentorship programs, tutoring, and we don't have a central repository for all of those data, the participation outcomes data for internship programs, for example. The responsibility for that data collection largely lies with the individual programs. Depending on the program, they'll keep rosters on paper, in Excel, in a Word document, on someone's C drive. The whole point is that there's no central repository for information on participation and outcomes in these special programs. And for a lot of people, this is a large part of their academic journey. And to the extent that underserved students are actually the targets of a lot of these populations, programs, we have an incomplete picture of the educational journey for a lot of our students. So what CUNY is doing, in my bio you'll just see a long title. Essentially, I run the data and research office for CUNY's central office. So what we're doing is piloting a process and a new central program database, working in partnership with our Office of Careers and Industry Partnerships to systematically gather participation, dosage information, and outcomes for each of those special programs run by our career office. We are putting all of that information into a central program database, and we are then going to train future AI tools, algorithms, for whatever reason, on a much more complete set of data. And in this way, we're providing a much more solid foundation for the AI revolution at CUNY. We would love that to be reproduced nationwide.
Thank you very much. I'll move to. I'll move to Dr. Janae. You did talk about racial equity, right? And you touched a little bit about the Black student. How does TCAS envision that, you said historical data on racial equity, how would that look like for TCAS in policymaking? What idea, or maybe just one, you would like to amplify in your work with policy?
Right now, I think amplifying the message and raising awareness amongst our congressional staff, with folks at the U.S. Department of Education, and partnering with other organizations in our coalitions and various spaces that we collaborate with. So like Ed Trust, who's a heavily racially equity centered organization. We partner with a number of similar organizations. So working together as a coalition to really raise the message, but also to be able to advance some of our policy priorities. And for right now, it's making sure that there are targeted wraparound supports in under-resourced and underfunded institutions. Because we know what works, we have evidence of it, but we need to make sure there's equitable resources and funding available at those institutions. And to address the some college no degree student population, you know, we really need to begin to explore various policies, like Will mentioned direct admissions, right? Why don't we have something reflective to attract or re-engage and re-enroll those adults who have went to college and then they're back home maybe, right? What is the outreach like for them? And so those are some of the priorities that we're gonna be doing.
Thank you.
Can I share, we should also be thinking about investing more heavily in Title III and Title V institutions, right? The institutions that are enrolling the most students of color, like HBCUs and HSIs and Annapeaseys and tribal serving colleges. These institutions are severely under-resourced. The U.S. Department of, or actually the White House actually sent a letter recently to I think it was 13 states around the underfunding that has happened at HBCUs in their state. And so I do think, number one, we underfund the resources that enroll the most students of color and the most low-income students. And that is a policy choice, right? That is a policy choice. And so I think if we're gonna underfund them at the state level, then at the federal level, we should be investing additional dollars to ensure that those wraparound services and mental health services, the type of supports that we know are successful because we have the evidence to prove it, like, so the institutions can actually do that. And I think that what we see happening, especially at the federal level, is those institutions that enroll the fewest students are getting the most federal dollars. And so I do think we need to invest more heavily in those institutions.
Fabulous, so wonderful. So I'll bring the conversation to the audience, but I just want to check the temperature. Policy-wise, one word to describe how you feel in your organization, just one word, not sentence. How you feel in your organization? Are you feeling empowered? How are you feeling? So I'll start with with you, Dr. Collins. I'll start one word to describe temperature in terms of policy.
I didn't expect to hear Dr. Collins.
Oh,
Oh, good heavens. I have no idea how to answer that.
how do you feel? One word describing
No,
the
it would
situation
have
of
to be-
policy. Okay, I'll go to Dr. Lee.
Hopeful,
Hopeful or helpful?
hopeful.
Hopeful, wonderful.
You know, I think that people are beginning to really get it.
Okay.
And I think we are beginning, certainly in Kentucky, and I think among our sister states, are connecting policy with goals in a way that we never have before. And I think that things look very hopeful. We've got in Kentucky an upcoming legislative session. I might feel differently in about 6 months, but I feel pretty good.
Wonderful. Hopeful. What's the next word?
I'm going to say urgent. We don't
Urgent.
have time to stop. We are accelerating full force ahead.
Urgent.
Energize.
Energized, Dr. Will.
Defensive.
I'll come back to CUNY before I take it to the audience. Yes, you're on? One word?
Oh, I'm going to say hopeful because our partner institution in the state, SUNY, has joined as an alliance member. So I think there's a lot of possibility there.
Thank
Sorry
you
to
very
steal
much.
your word, but
No, it's not stealing, we're sharing, we're here. So we have Anna in the audience, and we have, right, from TICAS, right, and Charles. So Anna will have the mic. Please, if you have any questions for our panelists, you gotta have some questions. These are policy panels. Yes. Oh, she's passing the mic around.
oh, you're passing.
Yes. All right. Anyone has a question? All right, fabulous. You can direct a question to a person or the entire panel, and one of them can pick it up.
Yeah, this is a very specific question, maybe for Janae or even Vincent. So you mentioned that CCA is advocating for an increase in funding for the post-secondary student success grants. I was working with several institutions on submitting for that grant this past summer, and it was to replicate the ASAP model, which is probably one of the strongest evidence-based models that we know in terms of student success. However, these institutions decided not to apply because of the requirement to conduct an RCT as part of the proposal. And so I don't know if you've been focusing on that, but they were not interested in doing another RCT for a model that's already proven to be effective. Right? It seemed like a waste of time and energy and resources, and particularly, they were not interested in a control group that was going to deny those services to other students. So I don't know if you've talked about that, but that's a huge one if you're going to support that
I'm looking
program.
at my colleagues because I come from community colleges, I come from public institutions, and Lord, I hope I don't get fired, but I have I have strong feelings and thoughts about that. We're in a climate where enrollment is low, college completion is low, and if we know something works, we need to make sure that we are not withholding interventions from students that can get them to the finish line. That's just Janae, not TICAS, okay? But I have been loud and clear about that since I've got there. I've gotten it, but now that is emerging. However, this morning at 11:30, I had a conversation around about the institutions that were selected, and then also how the focus on evidence-based, I believe we've overshadowed and complicated the instruction and the expectation, because if you are replicating or implementing a program that does have a RCT, it is our understanding as those who are in the coalition and advocating for that program that that is not a requirement. And so I literally just had a conversation this morning on like, do I publicly respond and say something? Is this a direct message to Ed to provide some clearer technical assistance and guidance? But that's my number one concern, because again, the institutions where students go and are not finishing are not on that list. So. We literally just talked about this at dinner last night. So, yeah. It's on our radar, and we're planning on moving forward to try to make sure we remove any additional barriers that might have come into play.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I think that we're asking folks to replicate something and we already have evidence that it works. And to me, that makes no sense at all. And we're disadvantaging the institutions that can use these resources to actually help students get over the finish line. To me, it's a travesty when an institution, and I don't know if anyone here from UC Berkeley doesn't need another $8 million from the federal government to support its students, right? There are community colleges and other institutions that, in my opinion, are more deserving of these dollars to get students to completion. When UC Berkeley admits the best and brightest already in the state, like that is a waste of federal dollars, in my opinion, and we should be targeting those resources to lower resource institutions. Sorry for taking it right now.
No, it's a tag team. That's what we do. But you know what would be helpful is if you know us now, but if you could send us an email, send us a note, right? And it's really good for us to say, like, here's an example. Like, for us to just say it, it's like, oh, you're pushing your agenda. But for us to really bring in those institutional voices is key and critical. And one of the things that I do at TICAS is I bring together the voices of institutions. So please, let's connect before we go.
Good question. We have in the back?
So our CUNY representative talked about artificial intelligence
Yes.
and the challenges with making sure that students of color or students who have been disadvantaged are part of this large data set to train artificial intelligence. You talked about the Career Center as the pilot project for gathering that data, and my understanding is that on many campuses, students of color or low-income students aren't as active in even campus programs that are not specifically drawing them in. And so I'm wondering what strategies you all are putting in place to even make sure that on your campus you're getting the robust representation of students of color, low-income students, because sometimes programs just on their face are not pulling in all of the students from the different demographics. The intentionality is the question that I have about how we build AI systems that are going to draw information for students of color and low-income students.
Absolutely. So at CUNY, these programs are actually built to be targeted to low-income students at pretty much all of our campuses. The idea behind this, well, so that's part number one. Part number two, the design of this central program database is also intended to identify students who aren't participating in any special programs at all. So we can learn something from that, but we can also use that information in order to target future resources to students who aren't taking advantage, or at least trying to understand why they're not taking advantage. In all of those cases, we have a much more complete picture of the academic trajectory for the broad range of students.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. We have a room for one more question. Going once? Dr. Barbara, did you have a question? Nah? Okay. I'm just calling you out. All right. I guess to wrap up, we have 3 minutes. Maybe you can tell us what should we look forward. What are your organization initiative? What are you looking for? So just give me one sentence because I got 3 minutes. So what are you working on currently that we can look forward to? I'll start with Kentucky, Cece.
One thing. Well, we are focused in a number of different areas. I think one of the things that we're going to be focused on most deliberately over the next year is really connecting our K-12 system more effectively to our post-secondary system, and that has to do in large part with communication, helping the communicators, the advisors in the K-12 system understand the process of transitioning effectively to a post-secondary institution. And we have found in our research and analysis that's where one of the big breakdowns is. And so we've set up an academy and we've engaged high school counselors and high school leaders across the state, middle school leaders, to really help them really shore up this big gap that we have between K-12 and higher ed.
K through 12. What's about California?
So we'll use the word defense, and I will say, we're working on policy implementation because we are not celebrating these incredible transformational passages of legislation and budget investments if we're not protecting their implementation with fidelity and ensuring that we have the courage to say when policies don't work and make the necessary adjustments so that they are meeting the needs of minoritized students across the state of California and beyond.
Fabulous. I'll go back to CUNY. What's New York? What are we looking forward to?
Well, we just completed a strategic plan. We are using that strategic plan to focus our resources on a number of evidence-based programs that work. And I will say, just sort of removing the question from the ASAP question from before, we are finding increasing evidence that RCTs and quasi-experimental methods based on observational data are qualitatively yielding very similar results with much fewer resources involved. So a lot of our work, our evidence in the future is going to be based on essentially cheaper observational data and less on RCTs. RCTs are still the gold standard, but we look forward to focusing on evidence-based practices, doing more evaluation research using quasi-experimental methods.
Thank you for that. I'll go to the Education Trust.
So this is going to be, it's kind of wonky and really boring, but there's a lot that right now negotiated rulemaking has been happening around student debt cancellation, and we also have accreditation coming up and several other issues that are going to be, that are going to go to the regulatory table. And if you don't pay attention to those things will come back and bite you in the end. And so I would urge you, we're paying attention to negotiated rulemaking at the federal level and suggest that we should all be maybe paying attention to that.
Dr. Janae, give us what are we looking forward to before we close out?
I'll talk about completion, but
Completion?
we are,
Okay.
our completion team, but we are, I'm really excited about looking at Black student attainment and completion in rural and southern states. And Trust years ago did a report on like the state attainment, and our southern states have some of the lowest Black attainment rates. And so I'm really excited about diving into that work. But I also want to give a charge to everyone in the room, to the point of this exchange that we had. Our organizations exist and work in advocacy spaces, and we have the ear to people who are at the table making certain decisions. Please leverage us and CCA to be able to inform our advocacy efforts and make sure your voices and experiences are lifted.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, thinkers and educators, it has been a pleasure to be your moderator. So give our panelists a good round of applause. We thank you. Thank you, Vincent, for opening us up. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for CCA. And I'm thankful for being part of this conversation. And if you want to connect, please, and we have evaluation, we're not going to let you go. Please do your evaluations. I thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in a hallway. Have a good night. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Miles from the city, church bells,